All right, good morning, everyone. If I could ask everyone to settle down. Welcome to the International Journalism Festival 2025. We realize that this is probably one of your first sessions, and we're so grateful that you're here to have this conversation with us this morning. Local news around the world, no matter what community it serves, plays a very critical role in bringing communities together, creating bonds, sharing information, and uplifting those communities. But we also know that due to a lot of the economic conditions around the world, challenges to business models, that there are a lot of obstacles in making sure that those organizations survive. We also know that there are emerging examples, some of which are up with me on stage today, that are showing us how we can forge a new path forward and overcome some of those challenges. This morning, we're going to hear about the stories of two news outlets that are trying to create a new model. We're going to understand some of the trends that happen around the world that are influencing local news at this point in time. And we're also going to leave a little bit of time for you to ask some of the experts up on stage what they think about the future. We've got a wonderful panel with us this morning, two researchers, two newsrooms who are eager to share their perspectives. I'm Noreen Gillespie. I'm the journalism director at Microsoft, where I work on partnerships with news organizations around the world to help build a more sustainable future. But I want to get started with Tim, because we've had a really interesting couple of weeks globally with a lot of market instability, threats of tariffs, pauses on tariffs. What have you been hearing about the current state of challenges for local news from some of the groups that you work with?
Well, first of all, good morning. It's great to be with you. It's great to be... Good morning. Can you hear me now? Wow, you can really hear me. Good morning. It's great to be with you and great to be here in Perugia at the festival with you. So this is a time of great anxiety in local news, I think in the U.S. and across the world. First of all, there are the economic challenges, which many of you know about. We're living through this historic transformation of how news is consumed, produced, distributed, and paid for. Audiences have splintered across many different platforms, and advertising dollars have flowed with those audiences to those other platforms. So that means that news organizations are having to rely on increasingly thin margins. They're having to rely on reader revenue, digital subscriptions, memberships, things like that, to make a go of it, and many of them are living on a thread. So in the past few weeks, to answer your question, we've seen this incredible turmoil around tariffs. So for example, 80% of the US newsprint comes from Canada. And we've had this on-again, off-again series of tariffs, which, if implemented, I fear would drive a lot of local newspapers out of business. We already have seen one in Cortland, New York, one of the oldest newspapers in the United States, just folded last month on the threat of tariffs. And so if you're a small newspaper publisher and you're managing your budget very carefully, if you have something like a 25% increase in one of your core costs, it's going to cause economic havoc. And so even the threat of tariffs has driven up prices and has caused problems for local newsrooms. And it's not just newspapers either. In the U.S., there's also now what appears to be a serious push to defund public broadcasting in the United States. And there's a lot of discussion about, the bias or alleged bias of NPR, National Public Radio, but really only about 1 or 2% of their budget comes from the federal government. But the big impact in the United States would be on local public radio, which gets 20, 21, 22% of its budget from the federal government. And a lot of those small public radio stations are the ones that are supplying local news in areas around news deserts. So if those go away, it's only going to further exacerbate the problem in the U.S.
This is a good time to back up, and this is happening against the context. You've been tracking local news trends in the U.S. for quite a while. Tell us a little bit about what that research has found and how these conditions are backing up against some of the conditions that already existed.
Sure. So I equate local news in the U.S. to kind of like a forest fire. So in a forest fire, you have a lot of destruction. But in a forest fire, you also have new seedlings that fall into the soil and that grow. So right now, there's a lot of destruction happening, but we're also seeing some exciting new entrants into the field, and we have a couple of them represented on the panel here today, which I'm excited to talk about. The map that you see in front of you is our local news deserts map. The Medill School does a study every year of news deserts and also growth in local news in the U.S. We have the largest database of news organizations in the U.S. So the counties that you see in yellow are complete news deserts. So these are counties with no source of local news, no newspaper, no digital-only site, no public radio, no ethnic media in those counties. The counties that are in light purple are counties that only have one remaining news source, and it's typically just a weekly paper. And so, as you see, there are large swaths of the Southeast, of the Plain States, and parts of the upper Midwest and the West that are really news deserts. And if we could go to the next slide, Noreen. So when you add it all up, there are more than 200 local news desert counties in the United States, entire counties with no local news. And then there are about 1,550 counties with only one remaining news source. So that means there are about 53.5 million Americans who live in areas where there's little to no local news. And we all know the implications of that, right? It's the implications on communities, the implications on democracy, the implications for being a government watchdog in these communities. But more than that, tying communities together. I think local news outlets are ones that are like a glue that bind a community together. And so when you lose those, these news outlets, the communities really suffer. Next slide, please. And then we also, our data science team at Northwestern looked at the current news desert counties, and then they looked at counties with only one remaining news source and their demographic characteristics to determine what are the counties at high risk of losing local news in the near future. So when you add that up, there are about 279 counties that we believe are at high risk of becoming news deserts in the near future. And God help us, if all those become news deserts, then we're going to have a much bigger problem than we already have today. And just as there are economic gaps in society, there also are gaps between the news haves and the news have-nots. So people who live in news deserts tend to be poor, they tend to be older, they tend to have less educational attainment. These are folks who need watchdogs. These are folks who need journalists in their communities, being that source of news and information to help them live their lives. And unfortunately, they're the biggest victims of these news deserts. Next slide. But as I mentioned, there are seedlings and there are signs of hope on the local news front. So this is a map of all 258 local news startups in the U.S. in the last 5 years, both digital and print. They're mostly digital, but they do include some print startups. And so this is something that gives me promise or hope about the future and for what's coming behind the loss of local newspapers. And what you see in blue are what we've designated as local news bright spots in the U.S. So if you go to our website, Medill Local News Initiative, you will see this map, and you can click on these blue stars, and these are newsrooms that are, doing entrepreneurial, innovative work, creating new business models. We have one great example sitting next to me today here in the U.S., and she's going to talk about that. But we are seeing regeneration. We are seeing regeneration in the forest, and so this is promising. There are now 1,575 digital-only local sites in the U.S. We're also seeing the growth of network local news sites. These are national firms that are creating news sites in localities across the U.S., which is another form of growth. The one thing I would note about this, though, is that when you look at the map, The growth is primarily occurring on the coasts, along the Acela corridor on the East Coast between Boston and Washington, D.C., and on the West Coast from LA through Silicon Valley and up into Washington State, and then in some major urban centers like Chicago, Houston, Miami, et cetera.
And Tim, for those who may not be as familiar with the layout of the U.S., what does that mean practically?
So it means that in the most densely populated cities in the U.S. on the East Coast, they're the ones that are benefiting primarily from the growth in digital local news sites. So those densely populated cities from Boston down to Washington. But if you're in the middle of the country in more sparsely populated areas, you're not going to see the growth of digital sites to the same degree. And part of it is scale, right? I mean, in a world where you need reader revenue, digital revenue, if there are fewer people, being able to raise revenue from them to run a local newsroom becomes a bigger challenge. So that's the issue.
I want to bring in Richard for a moment. A lot of your research has focused on changing consumer trends, changing consumption trends, and trust. We now have a good understanding about what's happening in the US, but tell us a little bit globally about what you've witnessed in terms of how news consumers are changing their preferences in this environment.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the kind of broader trends that we see across all of the countries that we study in our digital news report project is that people are getting less news, and I think this is something that has hit local particularly hard, and I think Tim has sort of spoken about that already. And I think we kind of know the reasons for that. It's partly digitization and the decline of traditional media, the fact that people spend more time with traditional media than they do with online media or online news typically, and of course the growth of platforms as well. And what we see when we ask people across the world where they think the best source of local information is, people often say platforms now for things like local activities, things going on in their area, not necessarily local politics and local news, but some of the other things that local news media used to provide. And I think we kind of know that story already, but the part that sort of we're looking into now, and I think is perhaps the part that people don't know, is how much this seems to vary by country. So if we look at some parts of the world, we see a very strong tendency in this direction. In other parts of the world, not so much. And I think it varies in terms of what researchers call platformatization, which is essentially just the extent to which platforms come to permeate through the media environment, and the logic of those platforms starts to influence the way people behave in those media environments. So in almost every country that we look at, everyone who's online uses some form of platform, whether it's search, social, messaging, or whatever it may be. But then when we look at whether people use those platforms for news specifically, we see quite a lot of variation. So in some countries, almost everyone who's online uses platforms for news. In other countries, it's around half. So that creates this kind of variation, and that has effects for local news. So when we look at in countries where this sort of platformatization is low, such as in the Nordic countries, then we see that people are still, when we ask them in a survey, they still say that they prefer to go to local newspapers or local television for certain types of local information, like information about sort of local activities, buying, selling things, that kind of thing. In other countries where platformatization is very high, such as in parts of Asia, then what we see is that all forms of kind of local information, people say they prefer to go to platforms, even when it comes to things like local politics and local news. And then when you look at countries like the US and the UK, they're actually somewhere kind of in the middle. So this huge amount of variation in where people prefer to go to get their local news and information.
You've also looked at trust trends in different parts of the world. How does that differ in terms of how much audiences trust a local news outlet in different parts of the world?
Well, I mean, the thing we see with local is that the sort of broader trends that we see, across all the countries, local is very much subject to those trends as well, but in slightly different ways. So when it comes to trust, as with all of the other kind of measures of trust that we have, whether it's sort of trust in news in general or trust in specific news outlets, we do tend to see this kind of downward trend, even for local. But it's a bit sort of more nuanced than that, in the sense that when we look at the list of most trusted outlets within a particular country, local is often quite near the top. So in places like the US, local TV is still one of the most trusted sources of news around. But that's also true in countries like France and in Spain and so on. So in general, local news media tend to be slightly more trusted than the average. The other part of this is that when we look at the downward trend just isn't as steep for many local outlets. So the trust is declining, yes, but not at the same rate often. So I think there's, in some sense, a sort of kind of positive story about trust. And I think it kind of makes sense when you think about all of the things that audiences say are important for them when it comes to trust in news. So lack of partisanship, kind of matching people's lived experience, representing people well. These are things that I think local news media is particularly sort of well positioned to do. So in that sense, it's not a surprise that local media is often a bit more trusted.
Maritza, I want to bring you in here. Let's go back a couple of years. It's the middle of the pandemic. We had another moment of economic upheaval. We had a fractured media environment, surge of mis and disinformation around the virus, and you had an idea for a completely new model that might work for your community.
Yeah, it was actually my mom's idea. She doesn't know that, but well, now she does. Buenos días, Maritza, Mexicana, living in Arizona, in the border with Arizona and Mexico. 2020, I was working on a documentary. The pandemic happened, border restrictions started in the US. My mom stayed on the Mexican side of the border. Me, my kids, and my husband, and my dog stay on the US side of the border. And my mom is the real queen of WhatsApp. She is the one who every single morning sends me like, good morning, beautiful, all the players, all the glitter and everything that you can think of. And then she was sending me everything that she found about COVID, whatever it was available in Spanish back then. And it was like local remedies, like abuelita's remedies, like put Vicks on your feet, like drink hot water with lemon and you're gonna be fine. And it's like, Mom, this is not how it works. And I started doing fact checking for her, and then my in-laws, and then my cousins, and that very, very small WhatsApp group that we created to fact check during the pandemic grew organically to broadcast lists, communities, more groups. We have a calling radio show now. We have a newsletter. We have a good feeling podcast about the border. We're everywhere. It's like you're in Arizona, you open the cereal, and we're there. It's like everything that we want to do. It's been a ride. It's been hard because we're talking about an immigrant community that has been very resilient with us. And when you have everything against you, finding joy in the work that you do in your community in journalism can be very challenging. And I think we have mastered that, and we mastered that with listening. So I'm gonna explain you a little bit how Conecta Arizona works. So we started with a very, very small WhatsApp group of 12. Now we reach more than 100,000 people. And we do it having fun. So we're fluent in English and Spanish, as emoji and GIF. So we that's how we roll.
News by emoji? Tell us a little more.
Yeah, so we do, it's like even how we do react and everything. So we need to have fun in journalism. We realize that when you're in a very good mood, you're more likely to actually have difficult conversations. So within all our platforms and products and everything, we have La Hora del Cafecito. As you can see, I'm working my orange coffee mug, because everything that we do as Mexicans is having coffee with our communities, with our comadres and compadres, and we have fun. And we interrupt each other, and we talk about Sofia Vergara getting divorced, and then Shakira with a new album, and then we're going back to tariff and Trump, and then we go back to what's going on in Venezuela. And that's how we do it in an hour in WhatsApp. And I think we have over there in one of the slides, how a cafecito looks like. Yeah, can you play that? That's a video. This is 1 hour of cafecito. So we have conversations on WhatsApp. So, and once a week, we invite an expert to connect with the community directly, and they interview them directly. No filters, no censorship, no nothing. So if they want to know what's your pet's name or what are you doing to deal with the narcos, they can be different questions, but the invited guests, they know that they need to reply to our community. And we even had a US ambassador join us once with his personal cell phone, and a Mexican consul. So when he said, it's like, oh, of course we have like appointments for task force for everybody. And when he was not replying to those members, they called him. And they held him accountable, and he was regretting at the end. But he's still part of the group. He stayed over there. So I'm very happy about that. So we're trying to bring back conversations and dialogue to journalism in non-traditional ways. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we did it just online, on WhatsApp. But now we're taking the cafecito out, and we're having cafecito in local communities, and we're talking about arts, and we're talking about music, and we're talking about good feeling stories that actually help us to survive this very challenging year. And we provide news and information, and we make that distinction. People are so tired of news and not seeing themselves reflected, but they need information. So we get the information first, and then we get the news to them, and then we have conversations, and then we listen, and we start all over again. And this is fantastic. But everybody thinks it's like, oh, WhatsApp, it was really trending a couple of years ago. Everybody was using WhatsApp, yes, to distribute content. But actually sitting down and moderating more than 1,000 hours of cafecitos, it requires like a special skill set of listening, but really listening to the community. Because sometimes we're having tough conversations about tariff or abortion or immigration or deportation or suicide in our WhatsApp group. And being able to moderate that conversation in a very human-centered, caring and generous way, that's something that we have been doing for the past 5 years, and I think we have done a very good job. We can still learn, but people trust us. And having conversation and being transparent, that's how we have built our communities. This is how we have built our news organization. And at the beginning, for 3.5 years, Conecta Arizona was me, like 6 a.m. till 6 a.m., every single time. And now, thanks, and we had to prove that what we were doing was worth it to invest in. Because at the beginning, it's like, is WhatsApp? Everybody hates Meta. It is in Spanish. It's like we have an English-only law in Arizona. It is in the border. It's like, who cares about the border? It's like they don't understand that we cannot put a wall in a WhatsApp. And it's like, we're just going to serve the U.S. and we're going to leave Mexico. No, we have one feeder in Arizona, and the other one, it can be Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, whatever. Mexico is our biggest thing. And then we're brown, and we have a thick accent, and we are fronterizos. The border feels different. It's not just being from the U.S. or Mexico. It's a completely different region. So something that we have been doing is building a team that actually reflect that. Now we're 7, but last year more than 30 persons actually worked with us in one way or another. We're hiring freelancers just to tell them and give them that platform to work on those passionate projects that they have been putting on hold because they need to pay the bills. We launched a podcast for WhatsApp, and it was extremely successful. But, well, that's what we think, because it's like it's encrypted and forwarded too many times. We don't actually know how many. But we partnered up with a bunch of radio organizations that actually distribute it. And what we did is talk about the lights in the border, not just the shadow. And we're reclaiming the narrative of the border. And I'm going to ask you a question. That's something that I always do when I'm talking about the border. But if I tell you border, what is the first thing that it comes to your mind? Just shout it out. What is the border for you? What does it mean?
Wall. The wall. The guards. The separation.
Exactly. For me, the border is tortillas recién hechas. For me, is when I cross and buy my wedding dress. For me, is where my kids were born and when I still choose to raise them. For me, it's going back and forward, and it's like dogs barking and everything. So our work in Conecta Arizona is to show you that border where we live when other people are just parachuting. And I think that's why being that human bridge is more important. So we build bridges where others are still insisting in building walls. And the last slide is how I feel. It's like the Chicana Brava, like tearing up the walls. That's the gift that represents me. Thank you.
Thank you, Maritza. We'll come back to you in just a moment, but I want to bring Daryna in. Your outlet launched in Ukraine just before the war. And since then, you've become not only a local source of information, but a global source of information. So you've got two missions. But since then, you've also become a leader in helping build up other local outlets in Ukraine. Tell us a little bit about how that works, what you've learned through that process, and where you see it going in the months to come.
Thank you, and very happy to be here. And I'm so sorry to bring the mood down right now, like after Maritza. But I am from Ukraine, and we've been invaded by Russia for 3 years now, and it's not easy, to say the least. The Kyiv Independent was founded just 3 months before the full-scale invasion. We had no money, no nothing, but we decided to go for it. We wanted to, building on the bridges, we wanted to be the bridge between Ukraine and the world. And we wanted that bridge to look and sound Ukrainian. At that point in history, a lot of people have been talking about Ukraine. But when you dig in, you realize they know actually very little about Ukraine. I've had stories of foreign journalists calling me and asking me where I am. I was in Kyiv, and they're like, "Have you heard an explosion in the Zaporizhia power plant?" I'm like, "No, it's 600 kilometers from me." But no one knew what size Ukraine is. And until this day, I think many people don't really know much about Ukraine, much about Ukraine's history with Russia, much about, the size of Ukraine, the culture of Ukraine, the politics of Ukraine. So we've took on the challenge to build the bridges, to add the information, add the context, explain Ukraine as much as we can. And we actually succeeded in that, against all odds. But at this point in history, we've done a lot. We've done documentaries, we've done podcasts, we've done video, we've done short news, reports from the front line, all formats, TikTok, all kind of platforms. We've come wherever people wanted to read about Ukraine. But then, however successful we are, we will never be enough to tell the world everything the world needs to know at this crucial point in history. So at some point we were thinking, what else can we do? And actually the logical thing was to help others speak to the world about Ukraine in English. We were in the unique position having this loads of experience because the Kyiv Independent came from the Kyiv Post that used to be the voice of Ukraine for 25 years. Until the editorial independence wasn't important anymore to the owner. So we had this experience of producing exclusive journalism in English, but local. And we decided to build on that. So we launched the Kyiv Independent School for English language journalism, and we started teaching colleagues in Ukraine to report in English about Ukraine. That would reinforce our mission. That would in a way create competitors, but on the other hand, that would reinforce the mission, and that's what kind of the whole thing is about, right? So we are supported by our readers, but we also reached out to international partners, and this project was, for example, supported by UNESCO. So we started the school, and we started teaching journalists from the regions to report in English, to pitch their stories to international media outlets, but also to kind of create and run English language divisions in their companies, local teams. Some of these local teams are like super small. It's like 2-3 people in a very small town. They're struggling to, So we've done that 1 year, and then the next year we realized that it's not enough to teach how to do journalism. We need to teach them how to do media, how to run a media company that has this pretty expensive English language angle to it, which is, more expensive, people to hire, new additional product features, and so on and so forth. So this year we ran the school with the kind of management department in it, and we started teaching media managers who want to expand their media coverage into English. But then what happened, we all know, there's crime. Trump came back on stage, unfortunately, and then the US aid freeze actually affected Ukrainian local news a lot, unfortunately. In many occupied areas or the close to the frontline areas, the advertising market died overnight. So it's been pretty much dead for the last 3 years. And many of them relied on the US funds, I mean donor funds in general, but US was by far the biggest funder for the local news in Ukraine. So yes, on the US funds. And once these funds were gone, many media started just folding, just in the real time, you know. As Trump was waking up and starting to spread the nonsense, like we would wake up and see media, local news companies just folding one by one. So we couldn't really watch that, and we decided to kind of ask our community to help Ukrainian local news outlets. So we started a fundraising campaign, a crowdfunding campaign for Ukrainian local news outlets. We've been able to help 3 of them. Some of them are, by the way, here in Perugia today. And so we fundraised $60,000. Just for your kind of understanding, we gave each 3 of them like $20,000, and that covered like 3 to 4 months of their expenses. So it's not, you know, we're not talking crazy shit money. Like they just needed some money to survive. So we've done that, and now we expanded our J School into actually consulting some of the local media outlets on the new business models, on expanding the reader revenue, the merchandise side of the business, and so on and so forth. So that's where we put our efforts, because for us it is, first of all, clear that the main focus is the mission, and the mission is to build the bridges, and we are not enough to build all the bridges. So we need to make them stronger to make the whole thing work. But also, if you are in a better position, and we've been grateful to be supported by 17,000 members all over the world, not Ukrainians, international readers who care about Ukraine, understand that it's the biggest land war in Europe since World War II, and we just can't go off the news. So we've been lucky to have them, and so we would be able to help. I think building this leadership in local news is also one of the important vehicles to grow them and develop them. We can do very little without each other, and so that's where we stand as a team.
Thank you. So we want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. I'm sure there's a lot. I've seen a lot of very engaged people in the crowd here who want to talk to you. But before we do, I want to ask each of you, you know, in times of difficulty, there's also a moment for innovation. What would be your advice to anyone running a local news outlet right now about what they need to do to sustain the next couple of years?
First of all, thank you each for your stories. They were very inspirational. You know, the key is, I think, knowing your audience and having a very clearly defined purpose and audience. One of the best examples, I'll give you a couple of quick ones, of innovation in the United States. Block Club Chicago, which is about a 5 or 6 year old digital startup in Chicago, filled a void that was being created by the loss of journalists at the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune, which had to retreat for economic reasons. And they cover local neighborhood news, and they do it very creatively, very effectively. They don't try to be something they're not. They're very laser focused on coverage of those neighborhoods in the city, and they deliver news via newsletters. They have events, which also can make money, and as well as a website, and then various editions of the website for various neighborhoods. It's incredibly popular. It's now profitable. It has a diversified revenue stream, and they're doing some terrific work filling the void for local news in Chicago. Another example I like to cite of a legacy newspaper that I think is innovating and really doing well is in Southern Pines, North Carolina, in the South, where the publisher said, you know what, this industry, it's not going well for me, so I got to try something different. So he created separate content vertical magazines, one in business, one in lifestyle. He bought the local independent bookstore because he realized that the people who read books also read newspapers, and then started having events there in the bookstore. And he's just done this remarkably creative work to build additional products around the core newspaper that are now doing very, very well. So there are other models out there, but I think the key is knowing your audience as my fellow panelists do, and then staying very, very focused and connected with those audiences on a regular basis. The model of large chains being detached from communities, I'm not sure that that works in this environment.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I think having a better understanding of what your audience wants, understanding that they're not always going to come to local outlets for certain types of information, that people have a sort of variety of kind of user needs. We've heard about some of those already. So people, yes, they want information and to learn about what's going on around them, but they also want sort of inspiration sometimes as well, and information that helps them do the things they need to do in their everyday lives. And we published a report at the Institute, I think 5 years ago now, which had the title sort of Publish Less, Publish Better. And that was a reflection of when we spoke to some pioneering local news organizations, how they were thinking about the next few years and what they would like to do. And I think that's still sort of good advice.
I think it will be actually do whatever you say you're going to do. It's like if you say that you're going to listen to the community, actually listen to the community. So listening should be in every single job description at the news organization, because we cannot put all the burden in the reporter who's doing the work on the ground while the leadership is completely disconnected with what's going on in the streets, in your community, and everything. And listen, but listen from a very open perspectives. Obviously, there are some times when I'm reading that WhatsApp group that I think is like, oh my God, it doesn't make any sense. And then it's how do I start moderating that conversation to a place that I think that it makes sense, and then I realize that I'm using my own privilege to do so. So I need to detach myself, or like, desnudarme, I don't know how to say in English, of those perceptions that I have myself, to actually listening to that community and be there. There is a lot of news organizations that put on their mission and values and whatever. We're meeting the community where they are. Well, when I'm in the ground, I don't see you there. I don't see you not fighting as an activist, but at least being part of what's going on in the streets. It's like meeting the community where they are. It can be WhatsApp, it can be the local coffee shop, it can be a community forum, it can be your neighbor, but we really need to commit to do that. And the other thing is like building your own thing, running a news organization can be very, very lonely. And then you start losing the magic and forgetting why you started doing this work. And when you lose that capacity of dreaming, of hoping, of seeing what's next, that is something good, you start losing everything and you become them. So one of the questions that I always ask myself, that we as team, we do each other quite frequently, is like, are we becoming them? Are we becoming the gatekeepers? Are we becoming whatever we were like founded to fight for? So that, I think that's very, very important.
I'll just add very quickly and very practical. I totally agree with everything said, but I would also say don't marry your ideas. Like, kill them if they don't work out. Kill the ideas, start something new, try again. Innovate, just innovate. You are doing it not for your ego and not for yourself or your team. You're doing it for the community. If it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work, kill it. That's basically it.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions. I'm just going to ask, there is a microphone coming around. Raise your hand, and please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hello, my name is Abbas Mpindi. I'm from Uganda. I run a news platform for young journalists. So my question goes to Tim. For the bright spots, I see you work for a university. I don't know how much investment you're putting into young journalists at a university as a bright spot to build local journalism. I think that we have a huge opportunity when it comes to young journalists across the world, empowering them to be the army that can, replace some of these news deserts that we're talking about. So I would love to hear, as a university, what's your approach to that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and you make a great point. And I agree 100% about the role that universities can play. We actually just posted a story on our website yesterday on this very topic about universities stepping up to provide journalism in areas that are low information communities and that need local news. We just started a program at Medill in the fall. One of the issues in the United States is that state house coverage has been decimated in many states across the country. And when you think about it, those are the places where laws are made that affect you the most. And so we have a student news bureau at the State House in Illinois now. In fact, if we were a news organization, we'd be the largest news organization at the State House. And it's providing great opportunities for students. Their work goes out to 700 news organizations throughout the state of Illinois and in neighboring states. So it's a win for everybody. The students are gaining valuable experience. The news organizations are getting content they wouldn't get otherwise. And the government's being covered in the way that it should be. So we're I think going to increasingly see universities, not just in the U.S. but around the world, help fill some of that void because it just makes sense. It's great for students, it's good for communities, and it's great for the educational growth of those students. Thank you for the question.
In the back.
Good morning, my name is Bas Boyster. I'm working at the, let's say, branch organization for local public broadcasters in the Netherlands. My question is for Tim. When I saw the map you showed, I was shocked in a way, but also I have a question about this map, because this is from the perspective from journalists. I mean, we will be probably all shocked when we see this map, but at the same time, I want to know if how the users see this map. Is it also, I mean, we see it as a news desert, but do also the users see this as a news desert? Or is this maybe something, can it also be something different by using WhatsApp groups or by using social media groups? And is that maybe seen as also a local news output?
Another great question. Thank you for that. We're actually going in the field with a poll in the next few weeks to get at that very question. What do local folks in these, what do people who live in news deserts think news is, and where do they get it? Where do they turn for news and information? Look, I fully recognize that Facebook groups have become popular in many areas where there's no professional source of local news. WhatsApp is another platform, Substack. There are definitely untraditional platforms that are growing in popularity, and that's great. We need more news and information sources. What I worry about is that there's no professional journalist like Maritza moderating those conversations, and they can become a cesspool of misinformation, disinformation, which is not healthy for a community. So yes, we're going to find out soon. What do the users think who live in those communities? Do they think they live in a news desert? But you know, we're also seeing the growth of these so-called pink slime local news sites in the U.S. that are run by political action committees or partisan ideologues, and there are now more of those than there are daily newspapers in the United States. And talk about misinformation and its growth. That's very concerning.
One last question up here in the front.
Hi, thank you again for the opportunity to ask another question. I'm Sonia from Slovenia, founder of a newspaper for children. And I have a question for Richard, because you mentioned the trust in local media that is really higher than in other news media outlets. I'm also one of the founding members of Children News Europe organization, and we keep hearing rumors, but we didn't make our own research, that actually the trust in children news media is also much higher than in mainstream media, let's say, in various countries. Do you have any such kind of information, or do you plan to do such research? Thank you.
I mean, the short answer is I don't have any information specifically on children's media. I mean, almost all of the research that we do is with adults. There is some data out there in the UK, just as the country I know the best, that's done by Ofcom, the regulator, which does an annual survey of how children get news, but it's not something that we've looked at, I'm afraid.
And we are at time. Thank you so much for being here. Please give my wonderful panelists a round of applause. And thank you all for sharing your stories today.